brain and nerves are connected? Yeah. So a big part of the nervous system is the brain. The brain is the major organ of the nervous system. And yeah, it connects to nerves all around your body and sends electrical impulses through these nerves to kind of tell your body what to do, control its functions. It helps you learn. It controls your digestion, your breathing, your heart rate. Basically the control system of your entire body. And the brain is at the center of it. So taking it down to on a smaller level. So remember on the first week, we talked about the different levels of organization where we have cells that join together to form tissues, that join together to form organs, that join together to form organ systems. So the nervous system is the overall organ system, and the brain is one of the organs. But going down to the cellular level, we have neurons. So neurons are the main type of cell you're going to see in the nervous system. They are the cells that send and receive signals. So this is kind of what a generic neuron looks like. So you'll see it looks very different from a normal cell, which might just be like spherical shaped with a nucleus at the center. That's like the normal cell shape you normally see. Neurons, they have a bunch of things sticking off of them. So they do still have a cell body. You can kind of see the remains of its circular shape here. And it does also have a nucleus, which is this green circle right here, which is, remember, where the cell stores its DNA. But it also has a bunch of protrusions or like kind of tree-like structures called dendrites sticking out. And this is so that the neuron can receive signals from other neurons. They have a bunch of these like finger-like little extensions of the cell so that many different other neurons can connect to this neuron and send signals to this neuron telling it whether to get excited or to not fire, or basically just give it information telling it whether to be more active or less active. So those are the dendrites coming off of the cell body. You also have this really long line called the axon, and the axon is what is going to send signals. So once signals come in from other neurons through these dendrites and go to the cell body, they are going to then be sent down the axon and to the axon terminals. And these axon terminals are probably going to connect to dendrites of other neurons so that this neuron can send its information down the line to the other cells in your nervous system. So that's generally how an electrical impulse travels down a neuron, and an action potential is the name of that signal. So when I was talking about different signals being sent down the axon, this like act of being excited is what we call an action potential. So what happens during an action potential generally is sodium channels will open. So basically in the cell membrane, there are these tiny little proteins that have kind of like a hole through them. So this hole can open and close and let sodium ions. Sodium is an element that is common in our bodies. It's also a component of salt. So you've probably seen labelings on like food packages talking about sodium levels. But basically when an action potential happens, sodium channels open and kind of excite the neuron. So when the sodium channels open, the neuron is excited, and this causes nearby sodium channels to also open, exciting the neuron all the way down the axon. And this kind of travels all the way down until it hits the axon terminal, and special molecules are released to excite or inhibit the next neuron in the line. And then to put the neuron back at its resting state, so its normal state, the potassium channels will open, which are also tiny little proteins on the membrane that transport potassium. they will kind of go in the opposite direction as the sodium and cancel out that action to kind of bring the neuron back to balance, bring it back to where it was before. So that's a neuron. You might notice a couple other things on this neuron that are labeled that I didn't talk about. So we have here a node of Ranvier and a myelin sheath and Schwann cells. Basically, you can think of this as insulation. So the neuron, you can kind of think of it as a wire. It's sending electrical signals down its length, kind of like a wire, transmitting it to the next stop in the pathway. And having this insulation, this myelin sheath, which essentially acts as an insulator, helps the neuron transmit signals much faster. So this is why we can think so fast, how we can react so fast. This myelin sheath really helps our neurons transmit signals much faster. And you'll notice that it's not insulated along the entire axon though. So this myelin sheath only exists in chunks. And at some places, there are nodes of Ranvier, which is where the neuron is exposed. There is no myelin sheath there. And essentially what happens is this action potential, this signal, kind of jumps from node to node. And so it travels much faster because it only has to jump between these nodes instead of traveling down the entire length. And then the Schwann cells are just these supporting cells that help create the myelin sheath. So they're not part of the neuron, but they help make the insulation for the neuron. So yeah, in summary, neuron is like a wire. Myelin sheath is like the insulation on that wire that helps the signal travel faster. All right. So we just talked about neurons, but what I just showed you, the stereotypical picture of a neuron, is not the only thing that exists in our nervous system. So there can be a lot of different shapes of neurons. They don't all have to look like the one we saw on the previous page, which is kind of this generic right-hand structure. You can also have neurons that just look like this, where their cell body might be somewhere in the middle between the dendrites and axons, or it might be like protruding outwards. They can have a bunch of different shapes, a bunch of different branchings, depending on their function. And other than neurons in our nervous system, we also have a bunch of supporting cells. So these supporting cells are called neuroglia or glial cells. And glia means glue. So you can think of it as neural glue. They are the cells that help hold this entire system together. So neurons are really important, but these cells are really important too. And you don't necessarily need to know like all of these specific names, but just know that there's a bunch of different types of neuroglia. They have a bunch of different functions. So they might help clean up debris within your brain or around your neurons, like the microglia do. They might help create that insulation, that myelin sheath, like we were talking about. The Schwann cells do that. They might secrete lubricating fluid like cerebrospinal fluid, which kind of sits around your brain and spinal cord and kind of makes sure it kind of protects your brain from damage so it doesn't like bonk into your essentially make sure your brain is kind of in a protected environment. It's controlling the molecules that can get in and out. And you also have cells that can provide metabolic support for your neurons, guide them where to grow, where to go, provide structural support. So there's a lot of different functions that these neuroglia provide, and they're very important for the function of neurons and for your nervous system overall as well. All right, so we looked on a smaller scale at the nervous system, and we know that the nervous system is composed of a bunch of different types of cells, from neurons to all the different types of neuroglia. So now, zooming out a bit, this is a look at the nervous system as a whole. So there are kind of two main parts of our nervous system, two divisions. The first is the central nervous system, and the other one is the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system essentially just consists of your brain and the spinal cord. So that's your central nervous system. And the name makes a lot of sense because as you can see, the brain and the spinal cord are both kind of towards the center of your body. And they're also kind of the center for integrating and processing information. So information from the peripheral nervous system, which contains literally everything else. So all of the nerves going out to your hands, your feet, your digestive system, your heart, all of those other nerves are going to be part of the peripheral nervous system. And essentially what happens is the signals from all over your body are going to be transmitted through these nerves to your central nervous system. And then your central nervous system will kind of process them, integrate them, taking into account all of this information that's kind of coming in from all over your body, and then send out other signals through these nerves again to kind of control your body and let it know what to do. Let it know how to react to the signals you get, what action it should take, or like maybe stopping an action that you're already taking, things like that. And you might see it abbreviated sometimes as CNS, VS, PNS. So CNS stands for Central Nervous System. PNS stands for Peripheral Nervous System. And peripheral just means like on the sides. So if you know about like your peripheral vision, that's your vision on like the sides of your kind of whole view. So peripheral nervous system is kind of like that. It's kind of on the sides of your body, not in the center. All right. And then your nervous system can also be further divided. So your peripheral nervous system it has autonomic and somatic divisions. So essentially the difference between these is the autonomic nervous system controls your involuntary bodily functions. So things you don't think about doing day to day, but you still do, like your heartbeat, you don't think about or like controlling your heartbeat, like when it goes faster or slower, you don't think about it, but it still happens. And controlling your digestion, controlling like whether your blood vessels are constricting or like getting wider or getting narrower, things like that. So all of these like kind of innate bodily functions that you don't think about are going to be controlled by your autonomic system. And this makes sense because auto means self. So it's like kind of self-functioning. You don't need to think about it. It just does it on its own. Versus the somatic nervous system, this is responsible for your voluntary actions. So whenever you're like consciously doing something, like if I'm clapping my hands like this, that was a voluntary action. The signal that was sent to my hands to do that would be sent through the somatic nervous system. So based on what I just talked about, which of these functions do you think are autonomic versus somatic? So let's start with autonomic. So let's have everybody turn on your annotation tool. If you know how to annotate, it should be on like the top of your screen on your bar. Yes, hello, yay, you can use your annotation tool. Let's circle the ones here that you think would be part of your autonomic nervous system. So which of these actions are part of your autonomic nervous system? Circle the ones you think are part of that. Give you guys a little longer to make up your minds about which ones you think are autonomic. Circle all of the ones you think are autonomic functions? All right, so I see 3 circles. I see a lot of circles. So yeah, secreting stomach fluid, your heart beating, and blood flow. Those are the 3 autonomic functions. All right, let's take a pause on the annotations. So yeah, secreting stomach fluid, you don't think about that, or like the regulation of how much stomach fluid you're secreting, or like generally the control of your digestive system of how much stomach fluid gets through to the rest of your digestive system. All of these things are controlled not consciously. So yep, that would be part of the autonomic system. Blood flow, whether your vessels are really narrow or really wide to control the amount of blood that flows, that is also an autonomic nervous system function. You don't actively think about it, but it is constantly changing in your body to adjust to your environmental conditions. And yeah, your heart beating, your heart rate is also something that's controlled by your autonomic nervous system. If you're not thinking about it, it still happens, can speed up, slow down. That's controlled by your autonomic nervous system. So where does that leave us? Then we know the rest of these, playing piano, throwing a ball, those are somatic nervous system functions. So yeah, you do this voluntarily. You have to think when you play piano, you're kind of like actively moving your muscles. Same with throwing a ball. As a general rule, anything that makes you move your skeletal muscles, like what you normally think of as muscle, like your legs, like jumping up and down, throwing a ball and playing piano, like I said here, or like snapping your fingers, tapping your fingers, nodding your head, things like that are all somatic system functions. All right, great. Nice job, guys. So then now let's take it down another division. So the autonomic system, the one we just talked about, where it's involuntary, doing things like controlling your heart rate, controlling your breathing, controlling your blood flow, also has 2 more divisions, a lot of divisions of the nervous system, I know. So this has 2 divisions, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So the sympathetic nervous system is mostly going to be activated when you're in a fight or flight mode. So you can think about if you're in a high stress situation, whether that be you're running away from some predator, you're being chased, or like you're giving a speech or something and you're really nervous because you have to talk in front of the class. Those sorts of things that activate your fight or flight response are going to be part of your sympathetic nervous system. So you can think about like when you get sympathetic for someone, you're getting really worked up over the situation because you're kind of feeling what they're feeling. So the sympathetic nervous system helps you get kind of really worked up, really excited about something, usually like fearful or kind of adrenaline rush. And then the parasympathetic nervous system is like the opposite. So let's pause on the annotations. Thank you. The parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite. So its function is mostly rest and digest. These are really convenient rhyming phrases that kind of summarize the functions of both of these. So parasympathetic nervous system is going to be more activating the contraction of your digestive system, increasing secretion of stomach juices, generally like making you in a more rest mode, more like I'm going to do all of my normal bodily functions. So this image summarizes well kind of like the different specific physical responses that the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems kind of do. So some of these, you see the sympathetic nervous system, it's going to inhibit salivation, like secretion of saliva in your mouth, your spit. It's going to, I don't know why it says pancreas here, that's strange. But the sympathetic nervous system, it's not rest or digest. When you're running away from something or you're in a high stress situation, you're not really too concerned about digesting the meal you just ate. You are more concerned about activating your muscles, probably increasing blood flow to your muscles, which is helped by increasing your heartbeat, to make sure you have enough energy to get out of this high stress situation, go to a safe place where you can calm down and properly digest your food. Whereas in the parasympathetic nervous system, stimulating saliva, stimulate activity of the stomach, stimulate activity of the intestines. It's all going to help you with that digest aspect. You're resting and you're digesting. And some of these are kind of other functions of both of these systems as well. You can look at them on your own time. I'm not going to go through all of them specifically here, but just generally know these two are kind of opposites of one another. All right, so as a recap of the branches of the nervous system, we started with our overall nervous system, and we branched out into two main parts: the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system on the sides, which consists of everything else, all of the nerves that are not in the brain or the spinal cord. And then the peripheral nervous system can be further divided into two categories. We have the somatic nervous system or voluntary nervous system, which controls your skeletal muscles, like your arm muscles, your leg muscles, your neck muscles, controlling all of those voluntary motions that we do. And we also have the autonomic nervous system, which controls everything below the surface that we don't think about. So secretion of your hormones, you don't think about that. It's also controlled by the nervous system. The control of your heart rate, your breathing, your blood flow, things like that, your digestion. All of those are in the autonomic nervous system. And then the autonomic nervous system is further divided into two branches: parasympathetic and sympathetic. So sympathetic, remember, is the flight or fight response. It kind of is triggered when you're super excited about something. Like when you're sympathetic for someone, you're going to get more excited. So that's how you can kind of remember it. And then the parasympathetic is the opposite of that. So it's just doing your daily maintenance of your body, the rest and digest. And homeostasis just means basically maintaining balance in your body. So yeah, nervous system can be kind of divided into all of these groups to kind of further categorize what part of the nervous system we're talking about and talk about all their different functions and how they interact with each other. All right, so we just talked about all of the further divisions of the nervous system, but the brain is still probably one of the most important parts of the nervous system. Remember, it's part of the central nervous system along with your spinal cord. And you can kind of make some major divisions within your brain as well. So 3 major divisions are your forebrain, your midbrain, and your hindbrain. And these are not really huge divisions, but essentially the forebrain is kind of this largest chunk that helps with all of your kind of more advanced functions, I would say, like problem solving, reasoning, thinking, learning, and regulating, like sending signals for you to move your body. Those are all gonna come from the forebrain. We also have the midbrain, which also helps regulate your movement and also processes your sensory information that you're receiving. And then the hindbrain is going to mostly be concerned with your maintaining your daily bodily balance, just to make sure you're doing okay, your basic life functions are doing okay. And we'll talk about the parts of the brain about each of these. So for the forebrain, you're going to have the cerebrum, which is part of the forebrain, and it is the largest part of your brain. So when you think of your brain kind of looking like this, this outermost part that kind of makes up the majority of this big, bulky oval part is going to be your cerebrum. And because it's so big, we separate it into four. Well, we didn't separate it. It is naturally separated into four lobes with kind of like small divisions between them that kind of have a little bit of specialization in their function. So they all do different things. And additionally, our cerebrum has two hemispheres. So there's two sides to our brain. This is a view from the top down. This is a top view. Yeah, we have our left hemisphere and our right hemisphere. Both are parts of your cerebrum. So each of the lobes, I mentioned how there were four lobes. The four lobes are called the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. So on the next page, I kind of have a nice image that shows you exactly where these are. So the red is the frontal lobe, which is at the front of your head, which makes sense. The temporal lobe is kind of on the side. It's in green, and there's one on each side of your head. And then you have the occipital lobe in yellow, and you also have the occipital lobe is in the back, sorry. It's kind of a similar color. And then the parietal lobe is in the darker yellow, and it's kind of in this middle top area of your brain. So what are each of these kind of responsible for? The frontal lobe is going to be mostly associated with your kind of higher level thinking functions. So helps with problem solving, judgment, emotions, your body movement. So controlling your body movement, sending signals to your muscles. Intelligence, that's mostly derived from this area, and also helping with speech, reading, writing, comprehension, and production of speech. Parietal lobe is going to also help with language. So it helps you interpret language and words. It's also going to help you with your sensory functions, interpreting your sensory functions. And the occipital lobe mostly helps with interpreting vision. Occipital kind of means vision. So, and then your temporal lobe helps you with understanding language, helps you with memory, hearing, sequencing, and organization. And it's important to remember that these are all kind of like general themes of like things that happen in each of these lobes. It's never going to be like very perfect in terms of like all of one function is in like this specific lobe, except in certain cases. All right, so talking about parts of the cerebrum and talking about kind of specific areas that are associated with specific functions, there are some areas that are very specifically associated with certain things you do. So there's these two areas of your brain that are called the Broca's area and Wernicke's area. So this one, Broca's area, is going to be your frontal lobe. Wernicke's is this kind of awkward place in the temporal lobe. And these are small sections of your brain that are responsible for language. So Broca's area, which is named after a guy called Broca, that's why it's named that way, is going to help you with language production. So this is a part of your brain that helps you talk, helps you write, helps you make sign language if you know sign language. Whereas Wernicke's area is going to be involved in language comprehension. So you're listening to me right now, you're understanding my words. That's because of your Wernicke's area. It's comprehending the language I'm speaking and yeah, allowing you to take in my sound waves and understand it as words. So sometimes though, when you have damage to these areas, it can cause you to not be able to produce language or not be able to understand language, which will cause what we call Broca's aphasia or Wernicke's aphasia. So these are basically diseases, or if you have damage to this part of your brain, you won't be able to do the function associated with it. So people with Broca's aphasia won't be able to produce language. People with Wernicke's aphasia won't be able to comprehend language. Another very important part of our forebrain is the corpus callosum. So I talked about how we have kind of two hemispheres of the cerebrum. They do need to communicate with each other. So that's why we have this structure called the corpus callosum, which is essentially the structure in the middle here that is a bridge or a link between your two hemispheres of your brain. It allows communication between these two sides of your brain, which is very important because the left side of your brain controls functions on the right side of your body, and the right side of your brain controls functions on the left side of your body. So you want the two sides of your body and the two sides of your brain to communicate. So this is very important. Someone asked if I'm drawing the lungs. I'm not drawing the lungs. Sorry if it kind of looks like that. I can see where you're coming from, actually. It does kind of look like it. But no, I'm trying to draw the left and right brain. Hopefully these wrinkles help a little. This is a really bad drawing. I'm sorry. But no, I'm talking about the two hemispheres of your brain. So the left hemisphere of your brain, right hemisphere, and you have the corpus callosum in the middle that kind of provides this connection. So what do we think happens if you sever the connection? Does anyone have any initial ideas? This might be a little difficult. All right, that's okay. We will take a look at this video to see what happens. I'm going to stop sharing and then share with sound, actually. But these people actually have someone who had a severed corpus callosum, and we're going to see kind of how his brain is affected, how his functions are affected. Oh wait, I did not share with sound, did I? Share sound. Okay.
Easier because students have a lot on them.
Can you guys hear? Or I guess this doesn't really help.
Brains. You've been working a long time with Dr. Gazaniga.
Can you guys hear this?
14 or 15 years?
Yeah. Okay, cool.
The collaboration began when Joe had surgery.
And you had this procedure to correct an epileptic problem,
yes.
Is that right?
Trying to stop the seizures. I was having seizures like every day or so, or sometimes 2 or 3 a day.
To control Joe's epileptic seizures, a surgeon severed the connection between the two halves of his brain. Cutting the corpus callosum like this prevented the spread of the electric storms that caused his seizures. But it also prevented the left and right halves of his brain from communicating with each other. In the years since the operation, Joe's epilepsy has been under control. He now earns a living at an egg farm, and in his everyday life, he's largely unaffected by the fact that his left and his right brains work independently.
Do you feel any different when you think about something than you did, any differently from the way you felt before the procedure?
It's just got a backup brain, that's all.
That's something everybody could use, right?
I found out how true that was right away when I was asked to draw a different shape with each hand. In a brain like mine, roughly speaking normal, at least all in one piece, the left half of my brain controls the right side of my body, while the right brain controls the left side.
Oh, no.
But because the two halves are connected,
Nothing wrong with that.
getting each hand to work independently isn't easy.
Well, we're seeing the fact that that Alan's hemispheres are connected, and that the motor messages from one are confusing the motor messages in the other.
I was just drawing an upside-down duck.
Okay. But when Joe is given the same task, his two hands operate as if controlled by two separate brains. What's happening is that each half of Joe's brain is given a separate instruction. He's asked to fix his eyes on the cross in the center of the screen. Anything flashed to the right of the cross goes only to his left hemisphere. Things to the left go to his right hemisphere. Because the two don't communicate, each hand does only what its half of the brain sees.
Wow, look at that. It's really like two different people doing the same.
That's right.
Same task.
That's the idea.
Okay, Joe, I want you to keep your hands out in front
In
of
an
you.
experiment that's now a classic in brain research, Mike Gazzaniga over 30 years ago used a similar setup to find out if the two halves of the brain are specialized to do different things.
Ship.
Joe is being flashed a word only to one half of his brain. Words flashed to the right
Storm.
are seen only by his left brain, and Joe can report seeing those words just fine.
Piano.
Good.
But when a word is flashed to his right brain,
Didn't see that.
Okay. Joe, I'm going to ask you
but now watch what happens.
to draw that with your left hand.
They got me lost.
Why don't you try drawing another picture of it over here, if that will help you.
Oh, phone.
Oh, okay.
Grr.
It's almost as though somebody has given him a secret communication.
That's
and
right.
now he knows that it's a telephone. But up until then, he was blind to it.
Exactly.
When Gazzaniga first did this experiment, it instantly proved that the ability to speak resides almost exclusively in the left hemisphere. Not until he sees what his right brain is drawing is Joe able to name
He
it.
said church, didn't he?
After looking at the picture.
But he had to figure it out about as long as we did. That's really interesting. It's a picture here of somebody communicating almost with another person.
And the communication is not occurring inside the head, it's occurring out on the piece of paper.
Yeah.
Blob. I really don't know.
You want to draw a little bit more?
So far, Joe has been seeing only one word.
Cat. That's a cat
Things get
sound.
even stranger when he's flashed two words, each to only one half of his brain.
The right hemisphere saw toad. And
And so his left hand draws a toad.
So there's the toad.
Oh, it's a toad,
And this time, I was able to guess what was coming.
Will
Now-
they put a little three-legged stool in there later, or what?
Joe's speaking left brain saw a stool. Saying the word lets the hand that's controlled by his right brain in on the secret.
That's great. That's really interesting. And if he had seen that with the Corpus Callosum intact, he would have drawn a toadstool.
Right.
Not a toad and a stool.
Right, exactly the point. I've been doing this for 35 years. Yeah?
And
It gets me every time.
Yeah, it must. It must.
This time, instead of naming the word, I want you to point to the word.
Again, Joe sees two words simultaneously. Bell goes to his non-speaking right brain. Music to his speaking left brain. When asked to point to a picture of what he saw, he chooses Bell. But when asked why,
Yeah, why'd you pick that one?
Music.
Music?
and when asked to explain,
It was music and bell, and it was a few minutes ago. Last time I heard any music was coming from the bells out here, banging away.
The bell's outside here.
So, look, good enough answer to me.
what's extraordinary is that Joe's speaking left brain concocts a plausible story of why he pointed to Bell, even when some of the other pictures more obviously represent music. Gazzaniga believes this determination to find cause and effect, this desire to explain, is the left hemisphere's most marvelous property.
One of the unique things to the human brain is this need to interpret why two events occurred. What was the antecedent to this? What caused this? And if you can imagine that a species like us that has that little chip in its brain that asks those questions is going to survive rather well, because it's going to figure out more about the nature of the world than a species that doesn't have that.
Okay, Joe, I want you to keep your hand.
But as I was about to discover, the right brain has a very useful survival skill all its own. What do you think will happen here?
So for you, we're doing a live experiment. Never done it before.
The experiment involves the 16th century Italian painter Arcimboldo, who made faces out of fruit, flowers, meat, even books. From other research, there's reason to believe that the ability to recognize faces is located exclusively in the right hemisphere. So Mike wondered if Arcimboldo's paintings would look different to each of Joe's two brains.
So will his left hemisphere say, I saw a potato, I didn't see a face? And will his right hemisphere say, I saw the face, and not comment on the fact it was made out of a potato?
You're going to see a figure followed by a choice of 2 words.
If this works, it'll be terrific, but we'll see. So here it is, live.
Okay?
The first painting goes to the right hemisphere. And Joe points to face. The next painting goes to his left brain. And this time he points to fruits. Mike seemed pleased. Are you having a moment?
This is too good.
Again to the right brain, and Joe sees it as a face.
Point it down.
But to the left brain,
Face made out of books.
Point it up.
What are the books?
are you happy with what you're
Fruit.
seeing?
It's unbelievable. He's doing it. You see that?
It's good. It's going so fast. It's shifting from left to right so fast. I can't keep up with you. You're used to looking at this.
When you show him a face in the right side, the left hemisphere,
Yeah.
he's focusing in on the elements that made up the face.
Yeah.
When you show him the exact same picture in the left field, going to the right hemisphere, he's focusing on the face and not the elements.
And not the elements. If you came down from another planet and you saw faces and vegetables, you might not think there was much of a difference among them. But the brain seems to be made up in a certain way to say faces are very different from other objects.
That's right.
And one side of the brain specializes in faces. huh?
Exactly right. Exactly right. It is an adaptation that we have to detect upright faces. It's a very important. You can imagine in an evolutionary time that all of a sudden you have the ability to detect quickly an upright face. You want to read the expression on that face. You want to know if it's friend or foe. You want to have a set of questions about that face.
The right brain might be skilled at recognizing faces. But when it comes to what gives the human mind its power, the ability to reason, to invent, to interpret the world around it, Mike Gazaniga's 30 years of research has taught him which hemisphere he wouldn't want to be without.
The old phrase around our lab is, don't leave home without your left hemisphere. That's where.
All right, so you can see how that guy who had, oh, how do I exit this screen? It is not, okay, I'm going to do this. Okay. And back to the screen. So yeah, that guy who had his corpus callosum severed, you can see how his hemispheres of the brain were unable to communicate to each other. So functions that were specific to one side of your brain, like producing speech or drawing or like seeing things from one side of your vision, were unable to be connected with those other functions. He kind of had like a split brain sort of situation going on. So yeah, corpus callosum, that is the thing that's going to be connecting your two hemispheres. All right, and another part of your forebrain is the limbic system. So the limbic system is basically a kind of set of different parts of your brain that is the center of our emotions, learning, and memory. So it has many different parts. 3 of the most major parts of your limbic system are the hypothalamus, which kind of controls your autonomic system, kind of taking charge of all of your like kind of normal maintaining balance functions, like helping control your body temperature, breathing, heart rate, secretion of hormones, things like that. We also have the amygdala, which is kind of a small almond-shaped kind of region of your brain down here. It controls emotional reactions like fear or anger. And we also have the hippocampus, which is kind of a, it's kind of this seahorse shaped sort of structure that is responsible for your memory. So the hippocampus, the name hippocampus actually means seahorse in, I think, Greek or Latin, I can't remember, but you can see how it resembles a seahorse. This is a hippocampus. It's in its kind of curled shape and it resembles a seahorse. So hippocampus, responsible for memory. Hypothalamus kind of controls autonomic system, and amygdala, emotional reactions like fear and anger. Those all help make up our limbic system. All right, so then what will happen if you remove your hippocampus? If you remember what we just talked about, what kind of functions do you think are going to be hindered if somebody's hippocampus is removed? Let's ponder on that. And then we'll talk a little bit about some other parts of the brain, and then we'll finish off with this video of a case study of a guy whose hippocampus was actually removed as part of a surgical procedure, and we'll see kind of what happened to him. So a long time, you might think that's kind of weird, removing part of your brain. A long time ago, or not actually that long ago, people did things called lobotomies, which is essentially a treatment, quote unquote treatment, for different mental disorders, like maybe seizures or like mental disorders, like if someone had like a really bad temper or like things like that, or schizophrenia or something like that. People would surgically go into your brain and kind of destroy specific parts of the brain that were thought to be associated with different functions as an attempt to kind of dampen people's reactions to certain things or like modulate their mental disorders. But turns out destroying parts of people's brains is not that good, because it's very easy to tamper with the wrong thing, because everything is so interconnected within your brain that you can't really destroy one part without significantly affecting many others. Okay, but anyways, you do still have some degree of specialization. So two other parts of your brain, these are going to make up your hindbrain, are the brainstem and cerebellum. So the brainstem is kind of this stem looking part of your brain that connects from your brain down to your spinal cord, and it contains the pons, medulla, and midbrain, which is confusingly named, but it basically regulates the body's automatic functions like breathing, heart rate, balance, things like that. And then the cerebellum, which is this other part of your brain down here, is going to be responsible for coordination and balance. So those are two other parts of your brain. As a recap, or kind of an overview, is containing some parts that we didn't talk about as well. We have this giant cerebrum, which is colored peach colored here, which is going to make up the majority of our brain. It has 4 lobes: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and temporal lobe, which all kind of have different functions, whether that be like logical reasoning, thinking in the frontal lobe, speech comprehension in the parietal lobe, sensory input in the parietal lobe, sight information in the occipital lobe, and speech comprehension in the temporal lobe. All of these have kind of different functions, but are still very interconnected and kind of make up the biggest part of our brain, the cerebrum. And the cerebrum has 2 hemispheres that are connected by the corpus callosum that allows signals to travel between these 2 hemispheres and allows us to go about our daily lives. We also have the brainstem, which is going to be responsible for kind of normal bodily functions, breathing, heart rate, things like that. The cerebellum, which is responsible for motor coordination. And then we have our limbic system, which is learning, memory, emotions, And we also have a couple of glands here too. Pituitary glands, hypothalamus are actually also both part of the endocrine system, which is the part of your body that secretes hormones, controls hormones, but that is for next week. All right, we're gonna end off with this YouTube video.